The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Coming to you from, yes, Baton Rouge. Glad to have you all here tonight. I want to let everybody know this is a live call-in show, 343-9927. You can call in and are encouraged to call in to contribute to the discussion on the topic of the evening. And the topic of the evening is human sexuality. Is it either this or that? Is it decreed by God, or is it a bit more complex than that? And here to enlighten me on the topic is Lang Baker. Thank you, Lang, for being with us again.
Glad to be here. Don't know how much I'll enlighten you.
Well, look, man, this all was just too hard for me. I gave up. I quit. So I'm counting on you tonight. But anyway, I thought I would go ahead and share. I forgot to turn my phone off here, so let me. Okay, there we go. I thought I would share what I found from a college textbook written by here we go, Janet Hyde and John DeLameter. It's titled Understanding Human Sexuality, and I just want to give a brief idea of what's involved in a human being's sexuality, just to get us started, Lang, and then we'll take off from there. I mainly just want to show that it is a very complex process. And actually, you know, it's just lucky coincidence I chose this topic for this week, and then we had the Pride March on Saturday, which I participated in, and it was funny. We had our people on the side screaming all kinds of invective at us and everything, and telling us that God hated us, and holding up their signs with the biblical quotes, and you know, I don't think you can really deal with people like that, but I'm glad that we're discussing this now, and hopefully we can help others who are listening to express their thoughts and feelings on these things too. Anyhow, according to Jane Hyde and John DeLameter in their Understanding Human Sexuality, they state, quote, "One of the marvels of human biology is that the complex and different female and male anatomies, males with a penis and scrotum and females with a vagina, uterus, and breasts, arise from a single cell, the fertilized egg, which varies only in whether it carries two X chromosomes, which is female, or one X and one Y." And I think you'll quibble with that too, Lang, but let me finish this little bit first, okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, during the first 7 weeks of the embryo's development, the embryos are identical, but at the end of the seventh, except for the chromosomes, and but after the 7th week, they begin to change as a result of the chromosomes they're carrying, and as they develop, the embryo will develop a pair of gonads, and they talk about gonads as being either testes, which are male, and the ovaries, which are female. Two sets of ducts, either the Mullerian ducts, which are female, and eventually develop into the fallopian tubes, uterus, and part of the vagina, if the embryo is female, and the Wolffian ducts, which turn into male stuff, which I couldn't understand the terms they use and didn't think it mattered because but they're basically every developing embryo has elements of both genders in it, and the hormones that are created as a result of the chromosomes on them get them going in one direction or the other. And from what I've seen, there are many different combinations there. They also list 8 variables involved in human sexuality. The first 6 of those are biological. There's chromosomal, as I mentioned earlier, 2 X's for female, XY for male. There's gonadal gender, ovaries in the female, testes in the male. Then there's prenatal hormonal gender, with your testosterone and Mullerian inhibiting substance, which is what kills off the female traits. Those are in the males, and then the prenatal and neonatal brain differentiation. So the brain actually plays a part in this too as it splits up. And what this shows me, Lang, is that, well, there are 6 biological variables here. I didn't read them all, but all of 6 of these can develop in infinitely different ways and produce an infinite variety of human sexuality, I guess. It's just none of these things. I mean, the 2 people, the authors of this book, state that normally, or most frequently, all 6 of these biological variables agree. They're all in alignment, and so you have what is perceived as a normal sexuality, male or female. But we've discovered that's not actually the case.
That's not always the case from what I've learned in the last 2 or 3 days.
Let's talk about the chromosomes.
It's been quite an education reading through some of this stuff. The first you identified there is either 2 X chromosomes or an X chromosome and a Y chromosome.
That's the common,
and
yeah.
That is common. However, from what I've been reading, there may be up to 11 different variations, not just those 2. There's sometimes just a single X without any second chromosome to pair up with it. And then there's an XY female, where genetically XY would indicate a male, and yet through the developmental process in utero, female genitalia are produced, and then there's an XX male, which is the exact opposite situation. And then you've got situations where there's 2 X's and a Y, or an X and 2 Ys, or you may have 2 X's and 2 Ys, or 3 X's, or 4 X's, or 5 X's. So there's 11 different observed in genetic research that's been done.
Okay, that's
configurations. That's just the genetic part of the 6 different variables you listed.
Right, and then there are the internal and external observable manifestations, I guess. Of course, internal wouldn't be observable unless you cut the people open, but the development of the internal organs and the external genitalia also comes out of that wide combination of possible chromosomes, and they could be any combination of any, could they not?
I suppose I didn't get that deep into, or what I read didn't go that deep into that, but it did point out that there's a lot of research that's still going on about just how these chromosomes produce the resulting biological form of the individual.
Right.
And first they were identifying what they call it's the TDF, which stands for testes determining factor, which is considered to be on the Y chromosome, and it's the hormonal responses that it produces that differentiate the male development from female development. But then they came to call that, instead of the TDF, they call it SRY, referring to the sex region of the Y chromosome. And they discovered in some cases that actually moves off of the Y chromosome and ends up on the X chromosome, so that TDF or SRY, the factor, is passed from generation to generation on the X chromosome instead of the Y chromosome.
Yeah, and who knows how it's going to manifest itself in further, future generations.
And then also, this chromosome can interact with other this gene can interact with other genes to where they inhibit or enhance the resulting processes that determine the development into the male or the female.
Yeah, and I kind of intuited all this detail many, many years ago. And, I mean, obviously I didn't intuit the details, but the results of these details that you're putting out. I mean, I've observed over the course of my life men or, boys, my schoolmates, who, for all intents and purposes, should have been women or girls, And the same thing with women. I mean, how many of us have not seen, a woman with broad masculine type shoulders and just all the features of a man, deep voice and everything, but yet they are women and men who are very effeminate. I mean, something has to be varying going into all that. Something's different. It's not just one or the other because, and I remember a coworker laughing at a couple of guys that were very effeminate at a truck stop down from where we worked. And I looked at him and I said, "Do you think they're faking that behavior?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, then why do you make fun of them? Why are you hating them? If they're not faking it, that means it's natural for them, and therefore it came from some natural process within them, And I saw, like I said, it should be obvious to anybody who looks at the world with an open mind that there's a whole lot more to human sexuality than just male and female.
There's a huge variety just in the human condition or the human manifestation, not just in the sexuality, but in the whole being.
Let's try to keep it confined to just sexuality, okay, Lang? Right, didn't you say you had enough to deal with just with sexuality?
You did.
Okay, well, anyhow, so we had discussed before going on the air the different kinds of sexuality that we identify or whatever.
But there were a number of different labels that you had on the list, and
they are labels. Yes.
There are labels, and then there are concepts that those labels address.
Right.
And some broad concepts are what we've just been talking about, what sex a person is, but then there's also what gender identification or gender identity a person experiences, which is more than just their sex. And then there's sexual orientation, which is the attraction that one feels for another human being, and to what degree that is categorizable as being for a particular sex or not.
Right, and I guess one of the things that they've been learning about, I think it's not intersex, but I guess the transgenders, for a long time before they began learning all this stuff, when a baby was born, they'd look at his genitalia and say, "Okay, it's a boy or a girl."
Or sometimes indeterminate.
Well, yes, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but that would be the intersex condition where there are chromosomal or other variables that change during the prenatal development that brought this about. But that was the simplistic way they classified, gender or sexuality was, okay, it's got a penis, it's a guy, if not, it's a girl. But then these kids grow up, and because of their own biology or whatever, they have inclinations toward the opposite sex, or they perceive themselves as a different sex than what they were classified as. And, that's laughed off by a lot of people who don't do cramming sessions on sexuality like we have. But, it's obvious to me that that's entirely likely. It's probably not as uncommon as we think.
Yes, and there are some cultures, we'll probably get into that later, where it's accepted and they recognize third genders or even fourth or fifth genders in some cultures.
Yeah, and they don't condemn them. They look upon them as something special. Or
in some cultures, yeah.
In some cultures, yeah. We did mention the intersex thing, and when I was growing up, that was called hermaphrodite. And, we see, I've seen pictures of, beautiful women with sexy bodies, except that they have male genitalia. And then I was like, uh-oh. And those are very common. And I did some looking, and I think there's like 1 in 20,000 farm animals are discovered with the condition, and many kids are too. Hermaphrodite or intersex, I guess is what it's called now, is when the individual possesses both reproductive organs of, the reproductive organs of both male and female. I know we had a guy in the Boy Scouts when I was a kid who only had one testy. Testicle. Thank you. Anyway, he only had one testicle, and everybody thought that was odd. And of course, being kids, we laughed at it. But when I read about the phenomenon later on, it occurred to me that he probably had an ovary for the other side, because that's generally the kind of condition they have. They have the external genitalia, for the most part, of one sex, and the internal organs of another. In this case, he probably had both, and only one of which would be functional, though, is the way I understood it. And I don't know that much anything more about it than that, but it does exist. I've seen it, and here again, that's another biological anomaly, I guess, or just difference. But yeah, we were talking about heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual. Um, Transgender, I guess, is different, right? Transgender is when they have a desire or they view themselves as one gender, but their external genitalia show something different.
That's what I understand. It's a gender identity uh, situation as opposed to a sexual orientation situation, which is the first three you named: heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual, or sexual orientations, which is that's distinguished. Sexual orientation is the pattern of romantic or sexual attraction to another person, whereas gender identity is a person's sense of self-identification.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm looking here with gender identity. There was a kid I knew in grade school and then high school. I won't mention his name, even though this was up in New Jersey and whatever, but even as early as 6th grade, I remember him coming to me and asking me if the dye in his hair was turning orange. He said his mother dyed his hair. And I came to find out years later in high school that his mother had apparently wanted a girl. He was born a boy, but she made him dress in girls' clothes at home and did all this other stuff to him as though he were a girl. Then it created serious identity problems for him. You know, it really messed him up badly. And sad thing was, he came in second for the homecoming queen election in high school, and that was the big joke, because he just had that kind of that severe of a conflict, and kids are brutal, you know.
Mm.
But that's an example there of the gender confusion, I guess. But I guess that might be off the course a little bit, but it shows problems with gender identity, I guess. And
you know, depending on just what the dynamics were between that individual and his mother, I don't know how much of it is an issue with the child, how much of it is an issue with the parent there.
Yeah, and actually, in that case, I think it was the parent.
From what you just described, it sounds like.
But that is still a factor in sexuality, though, I think, is it not? There are psychological factors that go on when all the biological stuff is mostly finished. You know, I guess people are psychologically conditioned or whatever, one way or another, or I don't know. But anyway, how about cultures? Now, I looked at some stuff here. The Thebans, I guess they were Thebans. They were Greek, I think. But this is ancient times, 375 BCE. This is from the Ancient History Encyclopedia. It states here that an unusual feature of the Theban army was the sacred band. This was a military corps founded by Gorgidas and consisting of 300 infantrymen linked in homoerotic pairs. And the idea being that soldiers would fight better if their lover were at their side. And this apparently turned out to be true. They were considered elite corps, you know, and they did some pretty good whipping up on the Spartans in the Battle of Tigyra. And there was another battle in against the Spartans where they also defeated them again. So they were pretty fierce fighters, and they were all of some form of homosexual or whatever, you know, that whatever those manifestations were there. But they were totally accepted, and actually the whole idea of having the male strength, I guess, and the pairing up of men made them more effective, you know, fighting men.
Well, there was, if you want to start looking at different cultures and the manifestation of gender and gender identity.
Yeah, looking at our time. So
there's an interesting web page on the PBS site related to their Independent Lens program, where they've got a map showing the locations of 36 cultures that have more than two genders recognized within their culture, and you can click on the map on any of those 36 points, and they'll give you a little bit of information about each of those. So I went through and looked at those, and of the 36, they all have at least a third gender, and 4 of those cultures actually had 4 different genders recognized, and one of them had 3 sexes. They recognized intersex as a sex there,
Sure.
and 5 different genders. And in 4 of those different cultures, the people of the culture recognized this third gender even in childhood. In some of the cultures, if a young boy manifested characteristics associated with femininity or appearance, they would be raised as that third gender.
I think the Native Americans had that attitude, or many of them did. They had that attitude toward them. They were special,
Well, yeah,
or at least acknowledged and accepted.
yeah, there's this recognizing in childhood, and there are like 7 of these different cultures that assign some spiritual specialness or shamanic assignment to the third gender that they recognized. And they would be given some special religious role within the society.
That's something that struck me, Lang, and I was mentioning this to a woman at church Sunday. The Gnostic Gospels, they talk in there about, in some of them, about someone becoming as God and saying that they have become both male and female. And that got me to thinking about the Tao Te Ching, that the yin and yang symbol that symbolizes that theory of the universe being made up of infinite, opposing forces that are in balance when things are proper and normal. And it just struck me that, someone who has both female and male, as the Native Americans generally stated here, they were able to see both sides of everything, and they were considered gifted for that trait. And that made me wonder if that's maybe the definition of a truly complete, a biologically and psychologically complete human being, if you know what I mean. It's got everything. Of course, I don't imagine anything like that would reproduce, but we don't know, though. Depends on what kind of sex they have, right?
That would depend on their sexual orientation,
right,
as opposed to their gender identity.
That makes me remember, though, too, that I read several articles, one by BBC Earth, that talks about how there are many, many, many non-human animals who also engage in homosexual sex, and they've been observed, and it's actually, in some cases, they say here that it's not necessarily an exception, it's more the rule. But of course they do engage in heterosexual sex also, of course, because they have to keep, reproducing. But, I found that very interesting, that it goes on. Animals don't choose, as far as we know. They don't have a conscious mind to be able to decide, well, I want to have this kind of sex instead. They just discover that it feels good or whatever, and they do it, and I guess, but they've been observed engaging in homosexual acts in the animal kingdom, over quite a broad range of species.
Yeah, the idea that there are 2 sexes that exist across all species of animals is refuted by the science. There's the way sex is determined, it varies. In some reptiles, the sex of the individual is a result of what the temperature is at a certain stage in the development. So it's not from the genes, it's from the temperature.
Yeah, and actually temperature, I believe, is one of the determining factors in human sexuality. We mentioned the variables and all that involved in prenatal development. Things like nutrition, the stress, if the mother is put under stress while she's carrying the babies, that could alter the chemistry, that alters the genetic, makeup or the development and things like that, the hormonal balances and whatnot. Anything like that could just change and, cause alterations.
Getting back to the cultural variation,
Yeah.
in the different cultures that recognize a third gender, they don't all recognize that in the same way, and in a large number of them, the third gender is what I suppose in contemporary U.S. vocabulary would refer to as transgender, where their sexual or their gender identity is the opposite of what the biological sex is. But then that's speaking in terms of duality, where it's either male or female. But then in others, the third gender is neither male nor female, or it transcends and encompasses both.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be a combination, or it may be neither one. Something that transcends sexuality altogether is what that gender manifests. In the one that had 5 different genders, it recognizes also 3 sexes, male, female, and intersex. Their 5 genders roughly match male, female, trans female, and one that encompasses everything, which are the intersex individuals. And the intersex individuals are regarded as something sacred and special.
Okay, and the intersex is the biological duality where they have,
right,
both genders, genitalia, or not genitalia, but your reproductive organs. These cultures you're talking about, though, Lang, are any of them modern? Or
these are, well, in large part they are modern. They're still recognized within the subcultures of a nation. They're not. Well, for instance, here there are several Islamic countries that have recognized a third gender, and is pointed out in here that in Iran, transsexuality is acknowledged. In the Ayatollah Khomeini issued a decree that trans, gay, and/or transgender men are permitted to live lives as straight women and permitted to undergo sex reassignment surgery.
How about that?
After which their official documents are changed to reflect their new identities.
So Iran is more progressive than the United States. Interesting.
On one particular issue.
One particular thing, yes.
The thing is,
well, yeah, but we really
it's not
don't.
A linear scale.
No,
just
of course
like
not.
gender.
But that is
isn't
that,
a linear scale.
That's truly fascinating. That a culture that is so supposedly so strict and conservative with the Islamic faith, is that tolerant of different or non-normal or non-God created sexuality, so to speak. Because like I said, the people that were protesting at the Pride March were all, to a person, professed Christians, and they don't tolerate that stuff at all. But anyway,
yeah. Well, there was one strange cultural orientation described here. Speaking of Christian, this is the Skoptsi people of was a Christian religious sect with extreme views on sex and gender. It was discovered in 1771 in Western Russia, and they believed that Adam and Eve had halves of the forbidden fruit grafted onto their bodies in the form of testicles and breasts. Therefore, they routinely castrated male children and amputated the breasts of women to return themselves to the state prior to original sin. They faced persecution but grew to as many as 100,000 in the 20th century. Many were arrested or deported, and only a few were allowed to procreate. By the 1950s, they'd almost disappeared.
Wow.
So that's like a non-gender, non-sex ideal in their worldview.
Well, yeah, and I guess it kind of fits in with my thinking of the Tao Te Ching and the Yin and Yang, where people have both characteristics of both genders, but I guess they attack it from the other side and just get rid of both genders. Yeah, that's interesting, in a kind of a pathetic sort of way. But yeah, that I was not aware of that, but that is rather violent. Of course, then there is circumcision, which I've never understood, for both men and women, which, and of course there's never been a problem, I guess, for men, but for doing it with young girls, apparently it's very traumatic and very painful.
Yeah.
These are just some cultures that, do these things. And
yeah, well, that brings up the issue of human rights for people who don't conform to the binary system of gender and sexual assignments. And there's a movement issued through the Yogyakarta Principles, which were adopted back in 2006, but have not been adopted by the United Nations, which calls for applying the principles of universal human rights for the protection of the individual, both in conscience and in the right to pursue activities in society with freedom and respect.
Interestingly enough, that's considered seeking special rights by some people. In fact, I had a man confront me last Saturday and say that these gay people pushing for these gay marriages and things like that are asking for special rights. And I asked him, I said, well, heterosexual people are free to walk down the street holding hands and showing affection toward each other without fear of getting beaten up for doing it. They can,
except in some countries.
well, okay, but I'm talking about America here,
Right.
okay? But, you know, and they can put pictures of themselves and their partners or, you know, husband or wife or on the desk at work and not have to worry about any repercussions. And that's all that gay people are asking for, or transgender people are asking for. They want those same rights. They want to be able to just live and, you know, exist as they are without having to hide themselves or suffer consequences if, you know, they come out. And I know plenty of gay people at my church who are professionals who won't march in the gay parade, in the gay pride parade, because they are known throughout the community, and if it's discovered that they are gay, they might lose business or you know, be fired. So you know, it's tough in America, I guess, that way, but things are changing, and it just takes persistence.
Yeah, well, I heard on the news, on the radio, driving in here today, that a new poll shows that there's a growing shift towards tolerance and respect and belief in the right of equal rights for same-partner marriage, and prohibiting discrimination against them, even in small businesses, and even for religious held beliefs that they shouldn't be allowed to discriminate.
Yeah, and
So, especially among younger people.
yes, I was fixing to say the younger generation will save this country if it is redeemable at all in that regard. I mean, anyway, we got to go, Lang. Great topic. You know, we both learned a lot as usual. Everyone, you've been listening to Wayne Parker, Lang Baker on A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio. We are out of time. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll talk to you later.